Well, this week we have a very special guest, and I think this is going to blow your mind just a little bit. With us is my friend, Dr. Judith Orloff, who is a New York Times best-selling author and has a new book, Thriving as an Empath, 365 Days of Self-Care for Sensitive People, which offers daily life-saving self-care tools for sensitive people, along with its own companion, the Empath's Empowerment Journal. Now, you're going to learn about what an empath is shortly. Dr. Orloff is a psychiatrist, an empath, and is on the clinical faculty of UCLA Psychiatric Department. She synthesizes the pearls of traditional medicine with cutting-edge knowledge on intuition, energy, and spirituality. Dr. Orloff also specializes in treating highly sensitive, empathic people in her private practice. Her work has been featured on the Today Show, CNN, Oprah Magazine, the New York Times. Dr. Orloff has spoken at Google. I got to do that. And has a popular TEDx talk. Her other books are Emotional Freedom and Guide to Intuitive Healing. You can learn more about her empath support online course at Dr. Judith Orloff, ORLOFF.com. Well, Judith, what a joy to have you on the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here talking to both of you.
We are happy to have you, yes.
So when did you find out you were an empath?
Well, why don't we explain what an empath is?
Well, let's have her tell us when she found out and
what it is. Because I think a lot of people listening they might think, oh, I have empathy, but they might not really understand what it is.
Are you saying you have empathy?
Well, you think my empathy is broken, but let's talk about it.
I'll answer both. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm also an empath. And so what I do is I combine my traditional psychiatric skills. I went through USC Medical School, UCLA, for my psychiatric residency. I did my internship at Wadsworth VA Hospital. And I combine all of that very worthy, incredible knowledge with my abilities to intuit what's going on in other people in terms of my patients, and to be an empath where I can feel in my body and my emotions what's going on in other people. Is I've never had the ordinary filters that people have. So I've always been wide open. It's felt that way, where I am an emotional sponge and sometimes a physical sponge where I can absorb what's going on in other people in my own body. And needless to say, that's helped me as a psychiatrist so much in order to have added compassion and to experience what my patients experience. But my challenge as an empath, as an emotional sponge, has been how not to absorb the stress, the anxiety, the issues of other people into my own body, yet keep my empathy and my intuition alive and well and growing. And so as a little girl, I didn't even know I was an empath. I was an only child of 2 physician parents. I have 25 physicians in my family. Wow. So very logical, linear heritage there. And I was a little girl who was quiet, and I would go into crowded places and walk in feeling fine, walk out exhausted with some ache or pain I didn't have before, anxious or depressed. And I didn't know what happened in that crowded place that would cause such a change in my body. And later on, I realized that I'm an empath, where when you're around crowded places with so many people, there's subtle energy that goes through the body and expands beyond the body. So you put all those people together and all these energies mix, and there's all this emotional information, mental information, physical information swirling around in crowded places. And my porous body and my sensitive neurological system, I took it on. But I didn't know that as a child. So my parents just said, oh dear, get a thicker skin. And I had no self-care techniques at all growing up. I was totally alone. That's why I feel so passionate about this book and providing self-care techniques every single day for empaths, so they're not lost. So they know what to do to stay centered, to stay energized, to stay clear, to not take on everybody else's stuff.
That's so interesting. So being an empath is different than just having empathy for people. So what I'm hearing you say is like I can have empathy. If I see a child hurt, I have empathy, but I don't feel that pain the way they feel it. It's different to have empathy versus being an empath, right?
Exactly. There's a spectrum of empathy. And in the middle of the spectrum are regular, beautiful people who have empathy and feel the joy and pain of others. But if you go higher on the empathic spectrum, you get the highly sensitive person who's sensitive to noise, smells, sounds, excessive talking, light. And then if you go even higher, you have all those sensory characteristics plus the emotional sponge and the physical sponge characteristic, where you literally become one with, which is a positive thing in a spiritual sense at one-ment, but it's not a helpful thing in terms of taking on other people's emotions.
Do empaths do you feel more for some people than other people? Do you feel more things when you're around one person, or is it the same no matter who you're around?
No, it varies according to the person. And it depends. I can feel all the positive things. Empaths have incredible gifts. And part of the self-care is taking care of your gifts, intuition, depth, the capacity for love, creativity, love of nature, knowing that there's a oneness in the world, that we're all brothers and sisters in one family, that anything else is an illusion. We know that without a doubt. We feel the earth and the empath are one. So there's no division, so that's very clear, and that clarity is extremely helpful.
And how come? What makes it to where you and other empaths feel so much more than, say, the average person? And why don't we? Well, we not.
So
I'm saying collectively, we. Why don't we understand it? Yes.
What's the neuroscience? Has anybody done an imaging study on empaths? I've done studies.
Wouldn't that be fascinating?
Well, I've done studies. I've done actually a number of studies on channelers, and that's actually been published in the literature on people who channel the dead. I've done studies on past life regressions, and I've done many studies on people who have sensory disorders. So the highly sensitive child, and now, since I learned about your work, many of them are highly sensitive, not only to sound and touch and lights, but they're also very sensitive to the emotions of other people. And what I often see is their parietal lobes, the top back part of the brain that are responsible for sort of sensing the world, work way too hard compared to other people. So that would be a fun study for you and I to look at empaths and to see, is there a difference in their brain. We just did a fascinating study on prayer, looking at speaking in tongues, which is basically channeling the Holy Spirit. And it's one of the gifts in the Bible talked about in the book of Acts. Anyways, our hypothesis would be when you're channeling someone else, you would actually drop your own brain function so that you become a vessel. And that's what happened in 60% of our people. Although one guy who did that, his basal ganglia lit up just like he just got a hit of cocaine. So I'm like, he probably likes to do that a lot. But just thinking from an empath standpoint, is it that there's less brain function so you're able to really feel what other people feel? Or is there more, and that sensory part of your brain works too hard?
It's a sensations of energy as well.
So
it's not so much an intellectual merging as it is an energetic merging, because when I am with both of you now, I'm feeling you with my entire body. I'm not just thinking you. I'm feeling you, and I'm having waves and changes going on in my body as we're interacting. And so it's like a flow. Everything is fluid. It's not static in my world. And so it's a different form of perception.
So how would someone know if they or one of their children or their spouse was an empath?
Well, there's a 20-question self-assessment test in my book that people can take to find out how much of an empath they are. Yes, you can self-diagnose if you're an empath. It's not rocket science. It's very simple. And there's some very basic questions you can ask yourself, such as, have you been labeled as, quote, overly sensitive all your life, as a put down? Do you need a lot of alone time to decompress and replenish yourself? Do you prefer alone time to being with people when you replenish yourself? Because some extroverts love going out and being with people, and that's how they get their energy back. But when I'm on sensory overload, I go to solitude. I go alone. And that aloneness is my nurturing place. It's my mana. It's, spirit is mana from heaven, being alone, because that decreases stimulation.
I feel you there. I'm the same way. I need to be alone, like quiet, my little space at home. Like that's how I recharge.
Yes, exactly. Or other questions, am I sensitive to noise, smells, or excessive talking? Empaths have a very strong sense of smell. We could go into an elevator and there could be perfume there and I could feel like I'm being nuked by it. And you might feel like, oh, what a pretty smell. And so if you take your sensory capacity and magnify it by about 1 million, then you can understand an empath. And the reason this is beautiful is that my capacity for love is very deep. And my capacity for spiritual connection and connection to nature and all the things that matter to me the most and other people is very, very deep. And connection is what's important to me. And as an empath, that connection is available. You feel the flow of everything. But if you want to find out if you're an empath, take the 20-question self-assessment test. And even something as simple as one of the questions is, do you prefer taking your own car places so you can leave when you please? Because empaths empaths get trapped.
See,
you don't want to, when I go to a social situation, I don't want to stay there for 5 hours. That's too much for me. I'll maybe leave after an hour, hour and a half. Oh, this must be a common theme between the two of you. It must come up.
He's very social.
She hates going to the mall.
I know he's social.
I hate the mall more
She'll
than
like
anything.
go to a store, pick the first thing that she sees and leave.
I feel overwhelmed.
And I'm like,
I'm overwhelmed.
and I'm like, how do you know unless you look at everything?
No, I don't want to be there.
No,
I want to order
no.
online.
That's not how it works. You don't want to linger in those markets, especially if they're crowded.
It's completely overwhelming when I see a ton of people.
And I'm one of 7.
He has a different constitution.
He does. He loves big family, big groups,
Right.
He's very social. We're just like night and day in that sense. So he's
But the secret is, and I talk about this in the book too, relationships, if a non-empath is with an empath, is to express your authentic needs. And Daniel, for you to respect them instead of questioning them, because it might be beyond your perceptual the way you relate to the world, but her way is different. It's just very different. Like my partner is not an empath. I could never be with an empath. It would drive me insane.
I agree with you.
We have to stop this, but when we come back,
this is fun.
Thriving as an empath, Dr. Judith Orloff, we're going to talk about how to thrive as a sensitive empath. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're here with our friend, Dr. Judith Orloff. She has a new book, Thriving as an Empath, 365 Days of Self-Care for Sensitive People. This podcast is for you if you're sensitive or if you love someone who is. This could be one of the reasons you guys struggle.
So interesting.
And there is hope. So, Judith, talk about how to thrive as a sensitive empath?
How to thrive as a sensitive empath is to realize you're a beautiful, precious being who has beautiful, wonderful skills, but you also have to learn self-care in order to deal with the challenges of an empath. The secret is not to get less sensitive, to get a thicker skin, as my physician mother told me over and over, dear, just get a thicker skin, you've got to toughen up. That's not the answer. The answer is to expand your sensitivities, but learn how to center yourself, learn how to set good boundaries, learn how to practice fierce self-care, learn how to have enough alone time, learn the signs of when you go on sensory overload so you could nip it in the bud before it explodes and then you say something you regret because you're so overwhelmed. When empaths get overwhelmed, they just want to go and be alone, and you don't want to get to that point. You see, it builds, and you could learn self-care to notice the signs in your own body when you start to get overwhelmed, so it doesn't just snowball. And then all of a sudden, I mean, this is what I do when I get overwhelmed. All of a sudden, I feel like I can't be in a relationship. That's where I go.
It's like, everybody go away.
Everybody just get out.
Yes. He's the only person that's like never done, like he gives me space. So
I know, but that's
great.
how it is. So that's why I bring it up, so everyone knows that's just part of it. So, my partner has been trained, if I ever get to that place, to say, oh, I think you need your alone time now. You need a good cry, or you need something. Just take care of yourself, instead of taking it personally.
Oh, that's
but
so great.
I don't like getting to that place because I do say things that I don't mean.
Mm-hmm.
Out of desperation of needing to be alone. It feels like you need to be alone forever, but you don't.
This is fascinating
So
to me.
describe for us how you discovered this in yourself. What was that process like?
The process was going through a lot of shame about my abilities as a child because I was alone. And I felt lonely, and I had, always, spent a lot of time in solitude and connecting to nature and looking up at the moon and loving animals and loving the ocean very much. The ocean has always been my companion, but I never had the support of people. And then as a teenager, I got very heavily involved with drugs to try and squash my sensitivities, my abilities. And, it was a negative path. I'm not suggesting for anyone. And there's actually a chapter in one of my books on empaths and addiction, because it's very common for empaths to become addicted because you want to just shut it all off, but that wasn't a healthy choice. However, it was the choice I made. But then with a lot of help, I had a psychiatrist who was like my angel in my life. I had people who helped me understand what an empath was and how I had to incorporate my intuitions rather than squash them. So I had a lot of good guidance, and thank God I've been, open to receiving it, throughout my life. And so through that education, and then, I had a dream that told me to go to medical school, to get my MD, to have the credentials to talk about this in medicine. I mean, it was very clear back in my early 20s, what, the message was, what I was supposed to do. Not that I wanted to do it, but what I learned about intuition is that if you just take one step in the direction of an intuition, of guidance, and even if you don't believe it, you'll see if the universe is backing you. You'll see if there's energy there, if it's working, if you're enjoying it. And I did. And I went through 14 years of medical training, and that was my non-empath stage, because they don't talk about empaths. They don't talk about intuition. I had it begin to open before medical school, close during medical school, and then it reopened again, when I graduated. So it's been a process for me. And now, my healing path has been integrating being an empath with my psychiatric practice.
Boy, I can't wait to read this book. I've got light bulbs going off like crazy. I'm like over here. This reminds me of someone that we know that we've been helping, someone in my family who is so sensitive that she feels other people's pain all the time, that she started using drugs to shut it down. She can't stand the sensitive, like she's just constantly so sensitive.
And she has Irlen syndrome.
Yeah, it just made my lights go off.
Say that again, Daniel.
Do you know the Irlen syndrome? IRLEN.
No.
Yeah. Look it up online, and
Sensitive to
everybody, we
lights.
talk about it in our podcast a lot. Helen Erland's a psychologist in Long Beach and discovered that a whole bunch of people who have diagnoses ADD, anxiety, and depression, what they have is light sensitivity, that their brains are sensitive to certain colors of light, and wearing colored filtered lenses makes a huge difference, not only in reading, but also in their emotional states. And we just had one of our nieces who's 9 diagnosed with it, and it's going to change the rest of her life. So that'll be one good thing you get from this podcast. Learn about it, because I bet a lot of highly sensitive people have the Erland syndrome. But one of the things I want to know is, how did your medical colleagues at UCLA deal with what, some people would label as a pretty soft science of empathy, although I would argue in general, psychiatry is a pretty soft science.
Yeah. Well, at the time that I was going through medical school and my residency, I didn't tell anybody anything. I didn't tell any of my peers anything. I felt like I finally belonged somewhere. I really loved my medical training, and I was growing and changing, and I went more towards the scientific side and learning all of that, and also working with patients I've always loved. But I never used any words like intuition or empathy. And the place that it was most dominant to me was when I worked in hospice and I was with people as they were dying, because then your empathy turns on.
Yeah.
And then everything, it was like instinctual. Everything in me, the healing instinct within me turned on, very strongly, helping somebody make that transition, or being with death and dying and grieving. That, is such an important transition that, I kind of secretly, expanded it at that point in my medical practice, but I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid of what they would think of me.
But
That's
later
so
on, you
interesting.
came out.
I
don't know if that's the right term, coming out.
I came out in the late 90s when I wrote Second Sight, my first book. And it took me 8 years to write that book because I had so much fear. And Stephen Mitchell, the sacred translator, was one of my readers of that book. And he would write notes on that book. Too much anger at your parents, too much this, too many unresolved feelings. Go back and work on them before you come back to this book again. Too much fear, work with your fear. So
That's interesting.
So that book was my coming out book, but it took so long to come out.
Right.
Because I had so many fears about coming out as an empath and psychiatrist.
You've said so many things that are just like I said, the thing about, it's actually my sister she struggled with addiction because she's so sensitive. She can't stand to feel, which is so interesting because I grew up very much like you. She was my half sister. I grew up alone, very much alone, an only child and by myself a lot. And I found that, like we talked about, I feel overwhelmed sometimes by people around me. And so while drugs, because of the drug situation in my family, were not an option for me. So what I did is just start building walls. So I'm assuming that empaths, I'm not saying I am one, but I'm assuming that they handle things in different ways. Because I know when I feel overwhelmed by people, I don't know what to do. I just start building walls. Other people do drugs. And when my dad was dying and he was in hospice, I'm a trauma nurse. I can handle anybody intubated and sedated. I'm good. Yeah. Split your skull open and I'm good. But the minute that they start with the emotional stuff, I shut down. I just completely shut down. Yeah, my dad, when my dad was going through hospice, I've never in my life had a migraine until that day that he went into hospice. And then I just could not deal with, it was the hospice nurse that helped me. They're amazing human beings.
Oh, fantastic.
But I'm listening to this. I can't wait to read this book because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, wait, there's so many unanswered questions that I'm now little light bulb moments are going off.
Well, and I wonder if there's a genetic component to it, because Tana's mother clearly has gifts, if you will, where she can see
and feel
other people, and was actually studied at UCLA in their parapsychology department. So does there tend to be a genetic component to this, Judith?
I think so, because it was passed down on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother, my mother, my my cousin, but nobody ever told me. And my mother purposely withheld it from me because she didn't want people to think I was weird. She had a big thing. You do.
That was my mom. Growing up with my mom, it was interesting. So I can feel that.
Well, your mom was weird.
Well, but the gift is what really made her stand out and have people look at her strange. But when you speak that language, people don't hear you. They don't understand.
Yeah, no, you have to behave yourself when you're around them because you never know if they're
feeling.
But
also, one thing that I don't mind doing is being sensitive to the vocabulary of other people.
Yeah.
Like I would never use the word psychic. I made the mistake.
My mom won't either.
Yeah. It's just not, it creates too much resistance. You want to use intuition, you want to use empathy, people can get that. And I don't care as long as people develop their empathy, develop their intuition. That's the goal of my books and my teachings, is to help people awaken this part of themselves. Whatever language you want to use is fine with me as long as it's compassionate.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about the science behind empathy and also empaths. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We're with Judith Orloff, and we are talking about empaths. This is so fascinating to me. I cannot wait to buy your book.
Thriving as an Empath,
yes.
365 days of self-care for sensitive people.
So I did not know what to expect today, Judith. I really didn't. And my little brain is like on fire at the moment. So it's just crazy. So I just didn't really know which direction we were going with this today. But so many things you have said are just like triggering inside of me, like, oh, wait, I understand, like this makes sense to me because of certain things with people in my family. And I'm assuming that because of that, probably a lot of our listeners are having that same light bulb moment and they're curious. And something you've said, you've made a couple connections throughout these podcasts this week about intuition and empathy. And I don't know if those are different or the same or they're connected. Because I know my mom, who we talked about in the last podcast, who is sensitive, quote unquote, she refuses to use the word psychic. She doesn't think of it as psychic. She just feels and sees other things when she's around people. But I always I think I resisted that because of what happened in my family and how people saw it. I was always like, oh, okay, this is just too much for me.
A little bit like the Twilight Zone.
A little too much for me. It's too much Twilight Zone for me. But she would always look at me and go, you have more of it than you think. And I'm like, no, I don't. No, I don't. But you always say that I have intuition and
oh yeah, no, I can't do anything wrong because I know you'll just know.
So, but I think of it differently. So I don't see things. I don't see things like that. When I'm around a person, I don't see events and stuff like that. When I'm around people, I know instantly whether I feel safe, connected, whether I feel like it's a warm feeling or whether it's like, don't go there. Like this person is not a safe person for me.
You have exquisite judgment about people.
Right. Judgment is how I've always thought of it.
And that's a form of intuition, is just knowing in your body, instantly, bam, bam, and you trust it.
I trust it.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So is that connected to what you call an empath? Is that similar? Is that part of it?
You're reading energy. That's why you can trust it so quickly.
Okay. Interesting. Because I refused to believe I had anything to do with any of that.
So what's the difference between empathy
I understand it, and you don't have to look at it that way. You could look at it any way you want so that you're comfortable with it.
Well, I'm fascinated now. No, I'm curious.
The gifts of empathy and intuition serve us as psychiatrists, that they're actually critical tools. But what's the difference between having empathy and being an empath?
Having empathy is when your heart goes out to somebody, they're going through a challenge and your heart just resonates with them and you kind of hold a love space for them. Or if somebody has a happy occasion, a baby's born or a marriage happens, where your heart gets warm and happy for them. And you can literally feel it in your own body. This isn't an intellectual endeavor. Empathy comes from the heart. And so the heart is an energy and you feel it. So you can feel in your body that happiness. But an empath is a little bit higher on the empathic spectrum, where I can feel what's going on in you. Let's say you're going through an emotional challenge, but I also can feel it in my body. So there's no filter or boundary. And that isn't what I want, because then I start hurting. And so one of the key self-care techniques is setting clear boundaries for empaths, and to notice the second someone else's energy comes into your body, or you start picking up something from someone else, so you could breathe it out, so you could practice meditation so that you can expel it. You don't want it. But because empaths tend to be over-helpers, and they always want to help, they always want to heal, and they feel that the way to heal is to suck somebody else's pain out of their body into your own body. You don't think about it that way, but it's an instinctive motion, energetic motion. And so that's something you have to be very discerning about and make it a choice rather than an instinct.
So I imagine many empaths get compassion fatigue. So therapists do this, especially trauma therapists. And I've been a psychiatrist a long time, goodness, almost 40 years since I made that decision. And I tend not to get it, because I'm sort of always excited about helping, fixing, getting people's brains
so
better. And I don't think that means I have low empathy,
No.
but it doesn't sort of come in and wound me.
Right.
Where it sounds like an empath, if they're not careful, can get overwhelmed by it.
Yes, and feel the pain. It's very painful because this world has so much suffering in it. You don't want to absorb everything. It's everywhere.
Like, I can't watch the news. I cannot watch the news without getting just like wound up tighter than, for him.
Especially lately, when it's just so filled with hostility and negativity. This fascinating new study on political extremes, people who are at the far right or the far left, they actually have rigid brains. And I've thought about that for a long time. Their frontal lobes work too hard. So if things don't go their way, they get upset. They tend to be argumentative and oppositional and a little on the OCD spectrum. And it was just really interesting. No matter which extreme you're at, you probably have the same brain. They would just hate that.
Interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting. But empathy allows you to have empathy with extremes. It allows you to have empathy with people you don't like. It allows you to see beyond barriers. That's why I feel so strongly about it, because even if you don't like someone or agree with them, your heart can reach out to find out how they're perceiving it.
So what happens if you block it? If you block this feeling?
That's fine. You can block it. You can make a choice to block it.
But does it affect you in any way?
Well, your mom purposefully tried to block it in you.
But it didn't help you.
And that must have made you very unhappy.
Very unhappy, like there was something wrong with me. It was a feeling of shame. You shame a young empath when you don't encourage those abilities to come out, when you don't say it's a beautiful thing, and here is how you can develop it, and here are some challenges you may face. When it becomes a healthy dialogue, it's a whole different story. But when it becomes a source of shame and I need to hide it, and I need to be this other person. My mother always wanted me to go down the mainstream and belong to country clubs and marry a Jewish doctor and, all that, which would have been fine, except it wasn't my path.
Right. And but can it make you physically sick? Can you take on physical ailments from blocking energy?
From blocking? You can. You can at times. One self-care technique I talk about in the book is building a shield or a bubble around you to block. And many therapists use this with difficult patients. If they're with a borderline and the borderline anger is just searing, they use this positive visualization technique to purposely block that, but keep the positive going.
I think because that makes sense to me. Protecting yourself. I would see that as protecting myself. I think what I mean is if you are an empath and you don't realize you're an empath, or you do realize it and you don't want to be, and you're sort of like, no, Like just like if you deny it,
So it's
and
like the
don't
left and right
acknowledge it.
sides of the brain
Yeah.
are at war
The
with
logic
each other.
and the feeling part of you are like in conflict. Like they don't, the logical part of you is like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, sometimes that's a phase that people go through, and they need to go through that in order to see that they're paying a price for that. Because when an empath tries to shut off his or her basic nature, that creates a tension in the body. And so it's just learning to embrace who you are in a very positive way. And so it's a balance, but it's very important not to be judgmental of people who block things out, because that's a technique until they learn other techniques. You see, that's just an instinctive thing. It's too much. I'm shutting it out. And it could be shut out with overeating and putting on weight. It could be sexual addiction. It could be substance abuse. It could be alcoholism. It could be shopping. Whatever it is, I want to shut it off because it's too much. That's what's happening. But they don't know what else to do. So once they learn the self-care strategies in the book, then they have options. And then it's not all subliminal and subconscious. You see, you want to bring it up. You want to identify this is an empathic issue, and this is what you do. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a beautiful being, but this is how you deal with it. And there's so many people I work with in recovery and 12-step programs who are recovering empaths as well. They were just super sensitive, and part of why they drank and used was because they couldn't handle it's too much. I mean, when you're a non-empath, it's hard to get that. How painful sensory overload can be.
Yep.
It's very,
I've seen
very
so
painful.
many children over the years. And when we scan them, there's a pattern we call the ring of fire, where their brain works way too hard. And they often will present like they have ADHD, and somebody will give them a stimulant. And 80% of the time, the stimulants make them worse. I mean, sometimes suicidal, sometimes rages. And if you don't look, how would you ever know? That's been sort of the theme of my life. But when we come back, we're going to talk about a very interesting part of the brain called the mirror neuron system. And it'd be so interesting to look at that in empaths. And then we're going to give you some more strategies from Dr. Orloff's new book on how to survive and thrive as an empath. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still with Judith Orloff, and we're talking about her book on empaths. Read the title for me.
Thriving as an Empath, 365 Days of Self-Care.
I cannot wait to buy this book.
For sensitive people. And Dr. Orloff actually has an event.
Where can I buy the book?
You can buy the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any bookstore. It's available everywhere. You can go to my website, drjudithorloff.com, and there's a journal that goes with it too, the Empaths Empowerment Journal, where you can journal about all of your empath issues and have it be your safe place to be and release and clarify and open up and write about it and own your empath self in the journal.
I'm like looking at different people in my family now and thinking, oh, wait, this makes sense. I want to learn more. So that's so interesting. And you have an event coming up.
I do on November 2nd in Venice, California.
Okay.
The Crystal Mystic Journeys Crystal Gallery, which is a space filled with these gorgeous life-size crystals where I'll be speaking. And it's a fun place to launch the book and talk about what it is to be an empath and for empaths to network, because many empaths feel alone. And I'm having a retreat for empaths coming up pretty soon, where it's just an empath retreat day, and you can check on that on my website as well.
Fantastic.
So when empaths come together, it's such a beautiful thing because they see they're not alone. And once you see there are all these people, very similar to you, it's comforting.
It's awesome.
There's actually an empathy system in the brain, and it's called the mirror neuron system. Tell our listeners or viewers about that.
Well, the mirror neuron system, that's the compassion system in the brain. These are neurons that help us feel compassion, that beautiful emotion, that spiritual state of compassion and empathy for other people. And it's theorized that in empaths, the mirror neuron system is hyperactive, meaning it's working overtime. It's similar to what you had said, Daniel, earlier on about the part of the brain working, overworking. In empaths, it's similar with the mirror neurons, where it's thought that they're working overtime in empaths so that the compassion input is intense compared to maybe somebody else's, versus a narcissist who has empathy deficient disorder and doesn't really have the capacity for true empathy that empaths have. Though in the book, I talk about the toxic attraction between empaths and narcissists.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time. It's deadly. And I'm constantly educating my patients about this. But narcissists are so deceptive at first because it seems like they have empathy. They're so charming and seductive and reel you in and make you think that you're the one or you're the, the most important person. And then the minute you don't do something according to their plan, they become cold, withholding, and punishing, because they lack what empaths have. And empaths are such fixers. They say, oh, this person just had a bad childhood, so my love will fix them. And, I'm sorry to say that's not true.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you talked about mirror neurons, it just triggered something in me as a mother. I would assume that being maternal would turn that on more. Because you watch any mother with a baby and all of a sudden she's gooing and guying and copying the baby and getting the baby to copy her. And right. It's sort of does that increase that part of the brain when you become a mother?
Yes. And all the
you joke, you laugh at me because I'm so different, or I was so different with my baby than I was with anybody else. It's so much
your voice
stronger.
Would change.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like,
you can't help it. It's just.
No, you can't, but it's a beautiful thing. Plus the oxytocin, the bonding hormone is flowing,
fabulous.
through you. So, but that maternal feeling that you're describing with empaths, that's often turned towards everybody.
Interesting.
So it's, that connection, you want to help, you want to fix, you want to remove the pain. And unfortunately what happens is that it comes into your own body unless you learn how to hold space for somebody, but not take on.
So
these are exercises I work with my patients on. This is how you do it. Let's practice. So a lot of this is practice techniques. How do you not take it on? Where I'll send a patient out and do a homework assignment saying, all right, go and sit next to that coworker at work, who's so draining for you, and practice this technique of not taking it on, and then report back. So a lot of it is putting these self-care techniques into effect. It's a bit of behavioral modification, but it's how does it work in the real world? So it's not just theorizing about it. It's like make yourself more comfortable by practicing these self-care techniques.
Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to enhance empathy in children?
That's beautiful. I was part of a New York Times article on that, and it's such a great question. You teach, if you have an empath child, there's a chapter in the book on how to raise empathic children. And so you teach them what their empathy is and maybe the downside of it. But when you teach somebody to develop empathy, it involves listening skills. It involves being quiet and having intuitive listening rather than always adding something to the conversation, where you listen with your heart and you try and feel where the person is coming from. And you can learn that a lot from animals, to be with animals and just see how you feel around them. But there have been studies in prisons where narcissists have been, they try to teach empathy to narcissists by giving them an animal to take care of. And, having that kind of connection to the animal and somebody else's well-being other than your own.
Interesting.
You have a bunch of books on Audible. Because I think, as people are listening to this podcast, they're going to want to get your new book. But
you've got competition.
It's not competition.
I'm joking. Because I always tease him he needs a 12-step program for writing because he can't stop writing books.
But what, besides the new book, Thriving as an Empath, what are some of the other books? And I've noticed you've actually read a lot of your own books that you would recommend for our listeners to really begin to dig into your work.
Well, I would recommend the Empath Survival Guide online course. If you're visual, it's with me on video that you can experience me teaching various aspects of being an empath, and it's downloadable. So you can watch it whenever you want to at your convenience. And it's empaths at work, empaths and emotions, empaths in relationships and love, how to navigate that, parenting and empaths. So I go through various lessons on particular topics to guide empaths through the various parts of life. And then I also have Emotional Freedom, which is a book I wrote about emotional health and emotional healing, because so much of being an empath is being in touch with your emotions and learning how to heal what has been traumatized or wounded from the past. Mm-hmm. And so Emotional Freedom is a good companion to my empath books. And the other empath book is the Empath Survival Guide. I have a trilogy of books, the Empath Survival Guide, the Thriving as an Empath book, which is a day book of self-care exercises, and the Empath Empowerment Journal are all meant to go together. One is to read the information, one is to develop self-care techniques for every day, and the other is to write and journal. And writing is so sacred, and not to do it through an auditory, or through a computer, but write, get the pen in hand and get it down. It's so different. It's such a different experience than doing something on a computer.
It really is.
It just reminds me of a learning disability that some children have. I call it finger agnosia, which means their fingers can't tell what their brain is thinking. So for some people, the act of writing actually sends interrupt signals to their brain and they get stuck. But if they dictate it, it can be better. So I would just say, whatever your ability to get this down, because I'm a huge fan of journaling, to get things out of your head so you can assess them. You mentioned Stephen Mitchell, and who's, I think, still married to my friend Byron Katie.
She's amazing. Yeah. She's amazing. She's really helped me.
We love Katie's work so much because the thing that she teaches is, what CBT has been teaching forever, which is not to believe every stupid thing you think. But if you don't get it out of your head and assess it, you believe it 100%. If you have the thought, I'm defective. If you don't write it down, get it out of your head, and then assess, is that true? Then the toxic thoughts can seriously damage you. And it sounds like empaths, if they grow up in an environment that shuts them down, that they actually end up with a lot of, we call them ants, automatic negative thoughts that just steal their happiness.
True. Such as there's something wrong with me.
Right. And then I love that because I'm at my board. I have a big whiteboard in my office. And whenever a patient says something like that, I'm broken, I'll write it down. I'm broken. And then we'll take them through the process of, is it true? Can you really know that that's true? How do you feel when you believe the thought? Devastated. Well, who would you be without the thought? And it's usually free. And then we turn it around. Peaceful. I'm not broken. And they tell all the ways they're not broken. In fact, they're gifted. And that's really our conversation today.
I'm gifted.
That the turnaround is, I'm not broken. I am, in fact, gifted. So
I'm a beautiful person. And not only that, it is fun to be an empath. It is such a blast to be an empath. Just go out. If Tana, if you and I went for a walk, we'd have so much fun.
Oh my gosh. I'm my brain is spinning right now. I can't even,
you have to go to her event.
I know.
For a second.
I know. I want so much more
So much fun. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Dr. Judith Orloff, you can learn more about her at Dr. Judith Orloff, ORLOFF.com. Thriving as an Empath, 365 days of self-care for sensitive people. Also, the Empath Empowerment Journal. Dr. Orloff has a course online. I imagine they can find it at drjudithorloff.com.
Right. On my website. All of the books and the courses on my website.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest on the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.